Hello, I'm John Furniture for IBM Development for Z, and I'm here today to talk about LDAP. LDAP, or Lightweight Directory Access Protocol, is a protocol defined by RFCs that flows across TCP/IP. It defines the requests and the responses that traverse the network, not how the data is stored. LDAP is commonly used as a place to store and find things, such as phone numbers, addresses, department numbers, etc. Data is stored in attributes in an entry, and the entries are grouped into a tree. This tree can be searched to find entries based on attribute contents or by simply traversing the tree and examining each entry. Each entry is named by a distinguished name, or DN. For example, CN equals Joe Plumber, OU equals IBM, C equals US. Entries can be added, modified, renamed, or deleted. The attributes an entry contains can be defined by the LDAP administrator. Entries are protected using access control lists, or ACLs. ACLs are stored in an ACL entry attribute in either the entry being protected or a parent entry. ACLs can be inherited from parent entries. If the ACL is in a parent entry, then it can control access to a child entry or to a class of child entries or a specific attribute in the child entries. ACLs can be very specific or broad in scope. User X can only read this attribute of this entry, or users in group everybody can search this entire tree. As mentioned before, LDAP can be used to store information, but computers have lots of ways of doing that. Why use LDAP? I will give 3 reasons. There are more, of course: authentication, authorization, and configuration. Authentication: a user's entry contains a password attribute which is used when a user binds to an LDAP server. The server uses the supplied DN to find the entry and compare the password in the entry with the password supplied on the bind request. Applications can leverage LDAP's authentication rather than creating their own credentials repository. LDAP also supports certificate and Kerberos binds. Authorization: once an application has used the user's credentials to bind to an LDAP server, the application can get ACLs for a user to determine if they are authorized for a specific operation. ACLs can control more than just LDAP, they can control other applications. Configuration: an LDAP entry can contain application configuration information. For example, an attribute in a user entry can point to where the application data for this user is stored. Centralized: the authentication, authorization, and configuration repository is one central location. The administrator has one-stop shopping. The user only has one password to remember. LDAP is available on many different platforms, including ZOS, where it is called IBM Tivoli Directory Server for ZOS. Included in the ZOS distribution is a server and an LDAP client, which can talk to any LDAP server. The ZOS LDAP server has several different backends. A backend is used to store and access data. There are general purpose backends that store data in DB2 or Unix System Services files, but there's also a special purpose backend which provides the ability to access and modify RACF data. RACF controls access to the data, which means that the LDAP user must have a RACF identity. LDAP provides a RACF identity in 2 ways: a special DM format specific to the RACF backend. For example, RACF ID equals Joe Plum, profile type equals user, and then the suffix for that backend. The other way is to use native authentication in a DN defined in a general purpose backend. The DN's entry will have an attribute which contains the RACF user ID. When the user binds, they use a normal LDAP DN and an entry lookup is done. The RACF user ID is retrieved from the entry and an authentication check is done by RACF. The centralized credentials repository can be RACF. As the data is in RACF, there are no LDAP ACLs in this backend. As with all LDAP backends, searches can be done on the RACF backend. However, there are only a limited set of search filters supported. See the Administration and Users Guide for more information. Enterprise Knights of IBM Z, providing educational insights to the security and integrity of our platform.